Hello and welcome back to Strict Scrutiny, your podcast about the Supreme Court and the legal culture that surrounds it. We are your hosts. I'm Kate Shaw.
I'm Leah Litman.
And I'm Melissa Murray. And listeners, prepare yourselves because this is a very, very special episode. We have such a treat in store for you. I almost cannot contain myself. I have no words. So Leah, go.
Okay.
Tell them what the treat is.
We had such a wonderful time with amicus of the pod, Jonathan Van Ness. We knew we needed to have them back on, and we think we found the perfect occasion to do so.
A-plus occasion.
A-plus
occasion.
Well, if we're grading the occasion, I might give it an F, but I'm hoping it will generate an A-plus experience for our listeners. So regular listeners of the show know that we stay up on the goings-on of the sprinter who moonlights as a senator, Josh Hawley, who in between some long runs and light jogs manages to find time to conduct rather unhinged questioning of various judicial nominees on the Senate Judiciary Committee and some light insurrection encouragement to boot.
So listeners, if you are not familiar with Josh Hawley, so here's a clip of Josh Hawley at the Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmation.
Do you regret it or not?
Senator, what I regret is that in a hearing about my qualifications to be a justice on the Supreme Court, we've spent a lot of time focusing on this small subset of my sentences, and I've tried to explain.
You regret that
many
we're focusing on
times.
your cases? I don't understand.
No. I'm talking about the fact that you're talking about
Child pornography
7
cases?
very serious cases.
I'm glad we agree on that. Don't you think
Some
we should be focusing on
some of which involve conduct that I sentence people to 25, 30 years.
3 months
for-
in this case, Judge. Do you regret it? You haven't answered my question yet.
Senator,
Do you regret this sentence?
Senator, I would have to look at the circumstances.
Yes, that's Josh Hawley introducing pornography into a Senate confirmation. All very, very normal. Equally normal has been Josh Hawley's Islamophobic-esque line of questioning at the hearing for Third Circuit nominee Adil Manji. Adil Manji has still not been confirmed by the Senate and has actually lost the support of Democratic senators because of this line of questioning that is tried to link Adil Manji to terrorism. That's not the greatest hit, though, on the Josh Hawley parade of horribles. At number one with a bullet is Josh Hawley, who has maintained that Naomi Rao of the D.C. Circuit is simply not socially conservative enough to be on Trump's SCOTUS short list. Query who would fit the bill for one Josh Hawley, if not Naomi Rao. It truly boggles the mind. So all to say, we occasionally, habitually mock Josh Hawley and call out his actually disgustingly gross behavior. And we don't do this because it sparks joy for us. We do it because Josh Hawley is actually among the authoritarianism forward, Gilead curious entrepreneurs in the federal government. So knowing what he is up to and what he is working toward is vitally important.
And because it is so important, we, the three of us, as an act of service and of love for our listeners, not for Josh Hawley, held our collective noses and read his book / polemic, which is titled, I'm going to try to say it with a straight face, Manhood, the Masculine Virtues America Needs. So we read the book and we reviewed it for the Michigan Law Review's upcoming book review issue. So it'll be available for your reading or hate reading pleasure shortly. And more broadly, we've talked on the show about how various political officials, with the cooperation of the courts, are engaged in an effort to restore traditional sex roles and claw back advances that women and LGBTQ people have made. And this book really lays all of that, the entire agenda out, right? It says the quiet part out loud. And so we thought it was important to give both readers and listeners a glimpse of the worldview that animates Hawley's book, that he is openly trumpeting because he thinks it is a path to political power. And we wanted to suggest that this worldview is very similar to the worldview driving the conservative majority on SCOTUS.
or we should say Brodus,
Or SCOTUS.
as the case may be. And as we noted at the top, we are joined by Jonathan Van Ness, JVN, who will help break down Josh Hawley's conceptions of manhood and masculinity, read them for Phil, and as importantly, help us have a good time doing so. So welcome to the show, Jonathan.
You guys, I'm so happy to be back. I miss you all the time. You are my Roman Empire podcast, except for I listen to you and think of you all the time. I think you're doing such important work. And wow, that book is all right. I mean, I just started twitching involuntarily. Interestingly, on my right side, which according to Eastern medicine is my sun side, which is your masculine side. So my right side, my sun side, is literally rebelling at this very thought of this book. But I'm really proud of you guys for reading it. And let's get into the horrors. And also, Melissa, your ability to assign pop culture references to such dark conservative activism is equally as amazing and like inspiring as it also is scary, because it almost makes it sound like I'm like Gilead curious, yes, but then I'm like, wait, no, focus, this is serious.
No, you don't want to be Gilead curious.
No.
You don't want to be Gilead
No.
curious. No. Again, the gist of the book is a little Gilead curious. So I'll just give you a brief description, listeners, because we read this, so you don't have to. Basically, the gist of the book is that American men are really taking it on the chin, which is to say that men are the victims of a society with its woke laws and policies that are trying to rectify the historic discrimination that women and girls have suffered in this society. And to be very clear, Josh Hawley isn't wrong about some of this. There's considerable social science and empirical evidence that backs up his claim, at least when we're talking about boys and men who are not in the highest income brackets and socioeconomic status. So there's just a lot of research about men falling behind in terms of higher education, especially among the middle and working class, not so much among the upper classes who tend to be the leaders of society. But in any event, scholars and policymakers have all talked about the range of factors that contribute to the gender gap in higher education, the gender gap in employment. Then they have real, actual, factual, empirical support for what is driving this. Josh Hawley wants to talk about this, but again, he doesn't really want to talk about it with any rigor. So by contrast, Josh Hawley's description of this problem is that it is animated almost entirely by what Hawley calls Epicureanism, which is a code word for liberalism or progressivism. And he says, quote, "Men have been told this nonsense for decades now by the press and the politicians. The nonsense is apparently equality and equal rights for women. In these circumstances, under the influence of this creed, the creed is the Equal Protection Clause, is it any wonder that so many men now feel adrift, bereft, and yes, ashamed to be men? Question mark. That's on page 9. And under that label of Epicureanism or liberalism, Josh Hawley lumps a lot of different things. So there is the left's denigration of men, the left's insistence on self-care, also screen time, including video games, porn consumption, which, as I said earlier, Josh Hawley is very preoccupied with. Declining marriage rates are another symptom of Epicureanism. Delaying or abstaining from parenthood, ladies, another sign of Epicureanism. And of course, the zero tolerance policy found in many schools alongside the childhood diagnoses of ADD and ADHD. All of this is the work of the liberal left, and all of it is a concerted campaign to stick it to men.
And as Melissa was just alluding to, there are scholars and policymakers who have basically said there is a kernel of truth to what Hawley is saying, which is that American men are falling behind in all kinds of ways. But Hawley, of course, wants to lay the blame at the feet of women and progressives. And what folks who've actually studied this phenomenon have come up with is, there are lots of different potential causes and interventions that might be appropriate to actually address the plight of American boys and men. But what Hawley thinks is that what we need to do is read the Bible and read it in a highly selective way, which I suppose is not surprising given the proclivities of the current conservative Supreme Court justices for highly selective reading of all kinds of texts. He basically, here, let me just read a couple of sort of quotes from Hawley's invocation of the Bible. So, quote, Abraham was tempted to abandon the promise of his marriage and seek for solace elsewhere. He gave in for a time to his doubt and despair, and yet Abraham did not give up, not ultimately. He found his nerve, he pressed on, he honored Sarah, returned to his covenant. He waited for her child as his heir, and in time God rewarded him and Sarah with a son. Narrator voice. Melissa, what's omitted from that version of the narrative that Hawley offers?
Before Abraham begat a postmenopausal baby on Sarah, he first had a whole ass kid with a servant girl named Hagar. And we might question Hagar's ability as a said servant girl to consent. But again, totally selective. The Clarence Thomas School of Bible Reading.
Well, that passage has been read out of the Bible, much like they have read out the Establishment Clause from the Constitution and other provisions as well. But Hawley invokes the Bible in part because he thinks that the solution to all of our problems is that American men need to live their lives according to 5 biblical archetypes, which we are going to talk about now. So I'm actually going to lump 2 of the archetypes together because Hawley kind of does so as well. And that is the archetype of the father and the archetype of the husband. So
first, can we ask JVN, what do you think about this? Like all the things that are befalling American society and American men in particular.
Is it because of self-care? Is it because of self-care?
Well, it's because someone put a mask on and like took care of themselves, took a nap.
I thought what was so interesting when I was reading all of my like highlighted portions from the book is how so many conservative policies are at the heart of what he thinks the problems are, like the crisis of fatherlessness. Like if you look at family separation, which is like really mass incarceration, and the way that we have like when you think about mass incarceration, it does affect people who have less income, majorly BIPOC people. I mean, but there's just a lot of overlap that he refuses to see the nuance on. And I just keep thinking like the real enemy of conservatism is nuance. Like even when he's talking about like, you know, they can't even say what a woman is or they can't even say what a man is, which are so much transphobia like all throughout this. Like the refusal to see the difference between like biology and then like the expression of gender, like biological sex and gender. There's a refusal to see that, or a refusal to understand that. And just like this, do you guys know about Sabrina Strings?
No, enlighten us.
She just wrote this book on like the death of romance. I had her on Getting Curious, and it kind of is talking about this from like the female's POV, but on romance. But because anything is everything, so much of what, you know, women are dealing with is all of the stuff that Josh Hawley, these policies are making things so much harder for women, and it's making it harder for romance and connection and families of any type. But it's just so interesting the ways that everyone are going about trying to approach this in such different ways and such scary ways, because we're also scared of each other, but we should be scared of him because Jesus.
We should be scared of him, but it's such a great point that many of the contributing factors that he identifies for the decline of men are in fact attributable to conservative Republican supported policies. So he noted delaying or abstaining from parenthood. Well, who the fuck opposes parental leave and family leave? Newsflash, right? It's not the Democrats. Or the zero tolerance policies found in many schools. Who is all about, right, like calling the police and having these, you know, disciplinary policies that are overwhelmingly affecting children of color? Again, like it's not primarily Democrats and progressives.
And not just leave, right, but funding for, you know, postpartum care and, you know, actual like
Expanding
Medicaid
Medicaid.
expansion and other state programs that provide people who have just given birth and babies and kids access to basic fucking subsistence. Like all of the most conservative states in terms of their governance are the worst in terms of those policies.
Like people plan their families and abstain or defer parenthood so they can afford it.
Yeah.
But I also was thinking about Sonia Passy, who's like the founder of Free From, which is this organization that is like experts on intimate partner violence, because so much of this really goes to intimate partner violence, and we don't even call it intimate partner violence, but the policies that Republicans refuse to like enforce when it comes to like the ability to prosecute intimate partner violence, like protect people who are in abusive relationships, and then the way that like pregnancy can play into that, it's so messed up. And then we're like scapegoating trans people and all of these other people when really these policies are making it so much more dangerous for women, genderqueer people, anyone who doesn't make a lot of money. It's just making it worse for everyone. We loathe.
So to this kind of vision for America that Hawley entreats men to follow is to live according to these biblical archetypes. As I was noting, one is the father and one is the husband. And Hawley just proclaims, and this is a quote, "The mission of manhood is bound up with fathering." And at the same time, right, he says, marriage is where, quote, "a man learns to open his life to another and bind his fate to hers," right, end quote. So defining marriage as between a man and a woman. And the idea, again, that all of these problems would be fixed if men just have children is wild, because it seems to depict and just expect that women are going to be these vessels for men's redemption. Like they just need to bear children so men can be good.
It's almost like women should not wear sexy clothing so men won't rape them or sexually assault them. Same energy.
Yeah. Very similar.
You guys, it's so hard. Like when I read the quotes, like I notice my like toes curling and my like fingers curling, and it's like almost, I'm like, it's like, it's almost hard. Like, you're just like, it's so hard. Yeah.
Like, what was it like to read this book? Because I read this book and I was just like, Jesus, this is, just like the selective reading of the Bible, the fact of these archetypes. This is a man with a family, and we hear very little about his wife, who is a Supreme Court advocate trying to keep medication abortion access off the table for people around the country. And he has a daughter. We never even hear about the daughter. Like, women are completely erased from this book. It is about manhood. I guess that's par for the course.
Well, like I noticed in some of my advocacy work in Texas that like a lot of people who worked in the Democratic Party would like observe from their colleagues on the right that like they would say off the record that they didn't even believe any of this, but they knew that if they could like speak about like link their religiousness to policy as much as possible, that would help them. But behind closed doors, like they don't believe any of this. But his book is so convincing that he drinks the Kool-Aid that I'm like, maybe he really does actually believe. I can't tell with him because he's really committed to and he's not Gilead curious. He's like full hardcore. He puts the G in Gilead.
It is hard to tell whether this is complete opportunism, like he's doing this instrumentally because he thinks it'll be politically palatable to a certain group of people that he imagines will continue bolstering him and pushing him forward and advancing him in the political spectrum. But I will say, to the extent he is drinking the Kool-Aid, other people are drinking the Kool-Aid too, because as Leah suggests, there is a lot of this sort of archetype lace logic and language in many of the cases the Supreme Court is spitting out under this new conservative 6-3 supermajority. So the emphasis on husbands and fathers and a man's mission to be a father works right in line with Dobbs, with, and women must be mothers. And 303 Creative, the case that basically said that gay civil rights have to yield to free speech. Masterpiece Cake Shop, Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, all of these cases where we're, sort of talking about heterosexual marriage and the opportunity for those who are religious believers to abstain from a vision of marriage that might be more expansive than heterosexual marriage. So, all of that is very much in keeping with the court's jurisprudence. And I wanted to call attention to two other archetypes that Hawley spends a lot of time on. One of them is the archetype of the quote unquote priest. And Hawley is very clearly nodding to evangelical Christianity. He's explaining in the book that men are not, quote, simply charged with building the world into a temple. They must also serve as priests, quote, bringing God to the world, end quote. And It's a lot easier, I think, to be a priest bringing God to the world if you get a government subsidy to do that. And perhaps that helps explain the court's jurisprudence in cases like Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, where the court authorizes the praying coach, Coach Kennedy, to conduct his prayers in front of an enormous audience on a publicly owned high school football field. Or maybe it's more in keeping with Carson versus Macon, where the court allows a no-aid policy to be invalidated so that religious schools can get public funding.
Yeah. And I mean, to Javion's point about has he really sort of like bought this all? Has he drank the Kool-Aid, or sort of what exactly is motivating him here? However terrible it is, and it's truly an atrocious book, I do think in some weird way it is an authentic expression of his real convictions and not pure political posturing. And I say this, I could be wrong, maybe it's both. But if he wanted to suggest that, kind of liberals, feminists, LGBTQ people, secularists, like these are the villains, and actually return to kind of traditional sexual mores and religiosity is the prescription. He could have cast religiosity and sort of like faithfulness in kind of broader, more ecumenical terms. It's so narrowly focused on a single Christian and evangelical Christian vision of what it means to be godly and to live in a family and a marriage. And it doesn't even pretend to be any more expansive in sort of who it is interested in reaching than that. And I think that maybe that is just the only valid, recognizable kind of model of American patriotic manhood that Hawley is willing to concede. And even I think for a lot of conservatives, that is an unbelievably narrow conception of sort of like what it means to be a person, an American, and a man. But that's what Hawley thinks is valid and legitimate.
He also seems to think that like Hollywood and just like the entertainment industry is like so much further left than it really is. I mean, I do think that obviously things like do lean a little left, but like the amount of like misogyny, transphobia, and just like kind of pro man POV bias that is in Hollywood that people have to swim against every day, it's not like a little, it's huge. And you are very rewarded for, I mean, Joe Rogan has one of the most highly visible and profitable podcasts around. Chappelle is one of the most highly paid comedians on Netflix. People who have conservative values and who are, say things that are widely considered to be transphobic and who clearly make trans people's lives harder day in and day out are very financially rewarded. So this idea that like things are just so left in Hollywood is also just not at all true. Like there is actually a very wide range of political views in Hollywood. And so just I think anytime people try to separate it so much into like us versus them, like in the way that he does it here, when you just lack critical thinking and nuance, like because porn's been around, this is also what Dr. Sabrina Strings talks about in her book, but like she really kind of lays it at the feet of like, like at the start of it, it was like Playboy, because like the idea of like romance, the way that he's talking about this is like that you're really supposed to have your partner's like best interests at heart and stuff, and like not be a misogynist like piece of shit. Whereas like, and it's like, and that was the time when people were like, oh well, you only treat women like this if she's like chaste enough and like honorable enough, and if she shows too much of this or that, then like she's not it, and she's like kind of not worth it. But that didn't become like widely culturally acceptable until like after World War II, was like in the 50s with like the rise of Playboy. And that's when she kind of thinks like culturally there was this like bigger shift. But this didn't just now stop working. Like, and there was this really funny thing I saw on or someone sent to me, like that had been a thing on X. It was a picture of what's that actor's name from Sex and the City? He was like Trey, like he had the erectile dysfunction and
Oh, Kyle MacLachlan.
Yes. Yeah. And it was like the death of woke is like men aren't men anymore. But then it was like this picture of him from like 1982 with his like shirt off with this like skimpy little like kind of like early 80s outfit when he was like playing something in like the early 80s. Just to say that like men have been expressing like a lot of different like fashion and like ideas about breaking like gender norms that we would consider like conservatively like not the thing for a really long time. Like this didn't just start in like when Target started like having a pride section,
Yeah, I don't know exactly when Hawley would say, like, we sort of took a wrong turn. Probably when Barack Obama was elected, if I had to sort of pinpoint it. But certainly, like, there's this,
Maybe
like,
also when women gained the right to vote.
Okay, so it could be either very recent, like either 2009
2008 or
inaugurated
1920.
but there's a flattening and a simplification sort of throughout.
I think part of the simplification too is that which men are really behind here. I mean, like, he's not down and out and beleaguered. The guys he's palling around with aren't down and out and beleaguered. They wield enormous power. They've gone to college. I mean, this is a guy who's like talking about the educational outcomes of men, and he's got 3 degrees from 3 elite institutions. I mean, it boggles the mind. I mean, like you said, JVN, like, the antithesis of what they're doing is nuance. And that's exactly right. This isn't nuance at all. Like, part of what he's saying is true for a certain subset that he and his ilk will not minister to because they have such antipathy for redistribution, whether it's economic or educational. So this book is not about the true down and out and beleaguered men who are falling behind. It's about him and his cronies, and they're not falling behind. They're actually on top.
Leah, that's what Leah was saying.
That's what she said.
It's like the policies, right? Because like Republicans
Like
are the ones who have like shipped all the jobs like to like country, like, off of the U.S. Like, they're the ones who have like weaken like the middle class, or at least like the way that I understand it. Like, they don't pay people a living wage. They don't give family leave. They don't make it so that anyone can really achieve upward economic mobility easier. So like, their policies, and also like, look at healthcare, look at like gun control, like people who are like working class and like don't have as much money, like, they're the ones who pay the price for these policies that Republicans keep enforcing. That is just so true.
Maybe to pivot back to the sort of structure of the book a little bit. So as we were talking about, the book is divided into these kind of archetypes that Hawley kind of explores. Leah already mentioned the father and the husband archetypes, and Melissa was talking about the priest archetype. So then there are 2 more. One is the builder, and one, save the best for last, is the king. So let's start with builder. He suggests that, there's this affliction of dependence that is part of his diagnosis of the problem with contemporary American manhood. And he says the antidote to dependence is building. And just as we think there are important connections between some of the claims Hawley is making about the husband and the father and the priest and Supreme Court cases, I think that's also true about the builder and Supreme Court cases. So you have the Supreme Court in recent cases really trying, it seems, to sort of value and valorize the kind of rugged individual who wants to build and make something, as against this leviathan of the federal government trying to take something from him, because it's, of course, a him. So there's a case from 2 terms ago called Sackett about, an individual, a couple that basically like wants to dump a lot of gravel on their land, and it's going to pollute some wetlands. And you know what? Wetlands are important to keeping water clean for all of us. And the Supreme Court basically says it's fine. Like, we can't really, it would be intolerable to prevent them from doing that. And actually a case just this term called De Villiers versus Texas, which is, just a case about whether a claim can proceed, but is also about this sort of Texas rancher who's being disadvantaged by the state of Texas. And so it is just, the court loves nothing more than kind of holding up this image of the rugged, manly individual against the federal government, and obviously siding with the manly individual. Okay, but I think we should talk about King as well, because the last section of the book is about exhorting men to lead. I mean, he is saying this like with a straight face. Like, he says, quote, "It is good for a man to exercise authority, good for him and good for those around him." So I don't know if like toes and fingers started curling.
That's
but
so
like
chilling.
That he is like patriarchy, return to patriarchy. That's it. It is a scary line of many, many scary lines in this scary book.
But despite the importance of men leading, the left today warns shrilly that male leadership can only ever amount to domination. That's like the whole, like, we're just saying like beating up your partners and like trying to force everyone to have the exact same religious ideals as you is not great. That's not saying that masculinity is bad, and your inability to make a distinction between those 2 things is scary, even though you have a big Adam's apple.
Yeah, it is.
Which is, we like a big Adam's apple, but we don't love, anything else really about you.
Maybe like linking what you were saying about the king archetype to one of the earlier archetypes we were talking about, which is father and husband. Again, the conceit of this book is that American men are downtrodden. But when you're thinking about, say, some of the court's recent cases, like the EMTALA case, which did effectively create one class of people who are required to lose bodily organs in service of Idaho's preferred vision about how society should be structured, namely that women and pregnant people should be forced to bear children, again, even when they are at risk of serious health consequences and loss. And that is going to be so because of the Republican justices on the Supreme Court, because that is their vision for, the country and how they think it should be ordered. And it is just really striking. Again, we were previously talking about whether this is like an authentic vision of Hawley or some posturing, but I don't think, like the Republican justices on the court are posturing. I think this is an authentic vision for them about how society and laws should work, that again, like women and pregnant people can be pressed into service and made to do these things at immense personal, familial sacrifice, because that's just their worldview.
I mean, the next part when he says that American men need to wake up because God made them kings, not subjects, and you need to be a king of your domain the way that your fathers and grandfathers were. Mr. Hawley, this is it's not great, you guys. This is not. I think actually American people need to wake up because we are literally marching into it.
That's one of the places where I think that kind of Hawley's aspirations for this book, I think, are pretty clear, which is that he wants to be the new Andrew Tate with the criminal misogyny sheared off, but the basic vision of the proper role of men as, the top of a profoundly and straight cisgendered men at the top of a profoundly hierarchical system in which they are owning this mantle of king, and everyone below them is a subordinate subject. That's really explicit. We sort of think his vision is that he wants to be, I don't know, a kinder, gentler version of Andrew Tate and appeal to millions of American men.
A less muscled version too. Less cut.
I'm sure Hawley works out. I feel like we've observed this before.
Not like that.
No. But he also clearly neglects leg day. He does not work out he's got very skinny legs and enormous shoulders. And I think you need a better balance in your workout.
What do you think, JVN? If you were his trainer, what would you
No,
advise
I'm not the
him
person to ask
to
about
balance
this. If
his
you've ever come
physique
to my
better?
comedy show, I have a lot of deep-rooted shame about this. I am I don't know if I can say it to you guys after the morning that we've already had. It's been a rough morning. It's hard for me to stay on topic with this book because he's a nightmare to read. But now I'm reading all my highlighted passages and I'm this is also TBH, my first book review podcast, and my ADHD is was really refusing to play ball until now, but now I'm really dialed into, I'm back to the book. I am, and maybe we need to edit this out because I am ashamed to say it, I'm physically attracted to him. I'll just fucking name it, okay? I'm physically attracted to him, but I hate his policies, okay? I hate his fucking policies. Okay? I do. But we talked about it last time. I'm also physically attracted to Mitt Romney. There's this principal vibe. There's this shoulder pad thing. When you have a big Adam's apple and shoulder pads, it just makes me... I don't know. I don't like it. And obviously, I think that the world has recently seen that I'm a complex person and I'm very layered.
You're not
okay,
wrong about Mitt Romney. You're not wrong about Mitt Romney.
But Hawley's got that fucking Adam's apple, honey. I know. He's an insurrectionist, and he's a white nationalist, and he's a Christian nationalist, and it's a problem. I'm working on it in therapy, okay?
Not Mitt Romney.
No, I'm talking about Josh Hawley. I have this, you guys, I'm recovering from sexual compulsivity.
Okay.
I've talked about it in my book, okay? I have this uncanny ability to divorce someone's personality from their physical body. I do. And even though I'm non-binary, they're always talking about biology, which I also talk about in my show. Biologically, I'm hardwired attracted to men with big Adam's apples, biologically, okay? And my body can separate their hideous policy from their being, and I'm ashamed of it, okay? But shame thrives in secrets, and so we just have to name it. That's what the truth is. But I fucking disagree with him, and I want him to lose his fucking place in office. But can I just say something really quick about, there was this quote in here that it really struck me about, the thing about the center of God's creation, that's all really scary. Let's get from it's like Man for Others is the title of chapter 5. And he's talking about how the biggest threat our society faces is that the male longing for adventure and heroism is dangerous, that a man's desire for accomplishment is oppressive, that masculinity is toxic inherently. So whatever identity men construct and life they make had better take all that into account, and had better screen out the objectionable elements of masculinity, which are by liberals reckoning most of them. This mixed message puts young men, especially in a bind. They are supposed to fashion an identity entirely of their own choosing in order to be authentic, but leave out the features that have defined for millennia. Good luck with that. No wonder young men feel bewildered. The classic identity of masculinity was never what it is now. It only became that recently. Like, it was a whole invention in the last 40 to 60 years. And if you know anything about queer history, you would know that every culture has had all these different expressions of genders, even in the West. He keeps talking about how the Bible has guided us through the Roman Empire and antiquity all the way through now. Honey, the Roman Empire and antiquity was not what it is now. It was a hot freaking mess where men had all sorts of wives and they were doing all sorts of things with all sorts of people, and it was not cool for kids, and certainly not this idea of a good space for everyone. So the way that he just has a selective idea of it, it's clear that he's not a historian, nor is any of the justices. Well, clearly not Roberts anyway, who didn't know that abortion is actually deeply rooted in this country's history, and Benjamin Franklin had an abortion recipe in his little diary. But the other thing was this country and the Constitution was for land-owning white men. So that is a problem because everyone else has had to fight for the recognition here. And so when that's really what we're saying is bad, not masculinity, just that the Constitution was founded on the idea that only white property owning men could vote. And we're saying that that ideal that it was built on and the wealth that was amassed under that and chattel slavery and the removal of Native Americans from their lands and the funds that were made off of that refused to be redistributed, that's the problem. And then men beating up people and gun violence. These are the problems. Not traditional masculinity. We love Tom Selleck. We love a big Adam's apple. We love wide shoulders, honey. But we just don't love these fucking policies, you know? So I just don't understand what the goddamn problem is.
I mean, understanding what Josh Hawley's problem is might be on the scope of this podcast and way above my pay grade. But what I think you were saying gets at something really profound and relates to something what I think Melissa had alluded to as the clear subtext of the book, which is it is about the narrow group of elite white conservative men who have been accustomed to having all of the power and calling all of the shots. And the book is uncomfortable with the idea of sharing political power and authority, right? Allowing anyone else to be in a position of authority, to actually be decision maker, to be Supreme Court justice, to be congressional representative. And that is, again, the group of people that Hawley seems to actually be concerned with, given that he's not engaging with any of the anti-redistributive policies that would actually benefit, people in lower income brackets, and instead depicts that as some kind of evil dependence that his view for America would just remove. And so the vision that he's clinging to, the reason why pointing out the fact that America has an exclusionary past is threatening to him is because he wants the exclusionary past to be the exclusionary future. And that is, I think, part of what he is resisting.
But wait, he keeps talking about Andrew Tate. Didn't Donald Trump have dinner with Andrew Tate?
Let me Google that.
I think he did.
He had dinner with that white supremacist guy. What's his
Nick
name?
Fuentes or whatever.
You think Tate came to?
I don't know that Tate
I don't
did.
know.
Yeah, Fuentes is who I'm thinking of. But did
Yeah,
Andrew?
I don't see.
I don't think Tate
anything.
can come to the U.S. Isn't he?
Yeah.
Under
Isn't
some
he,
criminal.
Roman
But I just you're right. But in the day. But I wonder how Hawley makes Andrew Tate the enemy and the left the enemy, because really Andrew Tate is he that is something from the right. The left didn't do that. How does I don't understand how it's everyone is the problem except for him.
Should we explain who Andrew Tate is?
Oh yeah, I just got scared to read the
Yeah,
passage
I
because
think
it's so dark.
maybe not
Okay,
everyone
okay,
is
yeah.
deep in men's rights Reddit.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll do it. He's someone who I can say, for the record, I've never been physically attracted to.
I'm relieved to hear that.
He was like this like social media YouTube star who like had this gigantic army, like men who were boys who were all about like, Hawley quotes him in chapter 5. He says, "The case of Andrew Tate, a social media provocateur and self-styled, quote, success coach for men comes to mind. Tate's idea of success apparently involves sleeping with as many women as possible, berating them, abusing them, and celebrating it all as manly and as, quote, freedom." As reported by the New York Post, a very refutable news publication, Tate, quote, advised his followers to, this is the part I didn't want to read, it's like, just abuse people, women. And then he counseled that if a man in a relationship has sex with someone else, it's not cheating, it's exercise. Meanwhile, if accused of cheating himself, it's bang out the machete, boom in her face, and grip her by the neck.
It's leg day.
But then he's talking about just like literally pulling a machete out to someone's freaking, like to a woman's neck. Like this is like what he was just like talking about. And Tate, and also Hawley talks about this. I mean, it should have like a trigger warning. If I posted something just talking about something like he just talks about it like it's Tuesday, raping this and doing that with Andrew Tate. Like there's no like respect for like the violence that he's talking about so casually, like all throughout this. It's so gross. I'm losing my attraction to him by the second, you guys.
Yes, no, there was never a Tate attraction. No, we got that, and that is excellent, and I'm sure that's not changing over the course of this conversation.
Oh yeah, but so then he got arrested because he had like Romanian Domino's pizza boxes in this video that he made, and then he got arrested by Interpol because of these like Romanian Domino boxes or something, and the internet turned his ass in. But he'd been like, I think he was like trafficking people and like literally like been accused of like all sorts of really like rape, sexual assault, bad, all sorts of bad.
He's under indictment for sexual assault, human trafficking, sort of all of that. No, that's right. And Hawley does kind of nominally distance himself from certain, again, of the most violent and violently misogynistic aspects of Tate's worldview and public persona. And we should say even before he was a social media personality, right? Like I think he was a kickboxer. But it's very clear that the distance that Hawley imagines, or at least posits, that separates him from Andrew Tate is nowhere near as vast as Hawley seems to want to convince his readers it is.
Yeah, and maybe just to take two examples of that. So, we mentioned that Hawley is entreating men to be fathers and husbands. Andrew Tate just like tweets out or puts out on X, sex is for making children. So like their worldview, it is quite similar.
Well, there's more to it than that, Leah.
Okay.
Say the rest.
Okay, so the other part of Andrew Tate's tweet is also anti-LGBTQ, which we also identify.
And anti-women.
And anti-women. Also, in some ways, it's anti-men.
It's anti-everybody.
Anti-pleasure. Yeah, read the quote.
So the second part of Andrew Tate's tweet that says sex is for making children says, any man who has sex with women because it, quote, feels good is gay. So again, anti-women, anti-pleasure, anti-men, anti-LGBTQ. He just packs it all in one sentence. And
what a weird thing to say.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Like a man who has sex with women because it feels good is gay? Isn't that like opposite?
Honey, if that were true.
I think it says more about sex with Andrew Tate than it says about anything.
With women because it feels good. Like
this says more about
real
sex
cell
with
phone.
Andrew
It
Tate.
is a real cell phone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Mitt Romney would never. You can laugh at that.
Oh my
Kate.
God, Mitt Romney really wouldn't. I do feel like he's a little bit more. At least Mitt voted to remove Trump from office. That's what I always tell myself when my timbers get shivered when I see him stride onto my TV screen.
You're not the only one. There are
Yeah.
a lot of people. So I know someone who is like a big muckety muck in the repro community, and she says she would climb Mitt Romney like a tree.
Honey.
Like, you are not the first person to say that to me. That's why I was so taken aback.
That
because I thought it
resonates.
was a very singular appetite.
No, yeah, that
Apparently
resonates.
not.
I thought that we talked about this last time. See, I've talked about this so many times I can't remember who I've said this to. But yeah, for me it all started in Salt Lake City.
We've never heard you say
Yeah,
that.
I
I
don't
would have
think we
remembered
For
that.
me, it
No,
started in
John, we
Salt
did talk about John Roberts, but not. I don't
Neil
think.
Gorsuch a silver fox, but
Yeah.
You did call Neil Gorsuch a silver fox.
Yeah,
Which did make us throw up in our mouths a little.
I do take that back. I think I did that for a reaction, you guys. I can legitimately say Mitt Romney, yes. Neil Gorsuch,
You don't believe
no,
it.
not
That
Neil.
seems so much more right.
Yeah, not Neil. I mean, that face is like not it for me at all. I don't know what I was thinking, you guys. I think I was in Texas during
you would
that
not
episode.
take a run at Neil
No,
Gorsuch.
I was going
is
through
what
it that
you're saying.
day, I think. I take it off the record. But Mitt, I stand by that, and I refuse to budge on that one.
Can I connect something we were saying about Andrew Tate to Neil Gorsuch, though?
Yes.
Even though you have, disavowed your previous statements about him. So as we were saying, Josh Hawley kind of attempts to put some distance between Andrew Tate's more violent expressions of misogyny and Josh Hawley's other expressions of misogyny, even though their worldviews are in some respects quite similar. And I think this kind of relates to our effort to draw connections between this book and what the Supreme Court is doing. Because when you think about, again, I know I referenced the EMTALA case before, it's just top of mind. When you think about what the court is doing, again, essentially requiring women to bear these life-altering consequences, health-altering consequences, that is a kind of violence. It is just done under the language of the law, and with these kind of questions that the justices are bandying about how about a conditional spending program, or how about preemption? But when the rubber hits the road, the again, operative arrangement that they have endorsed is that states can prohibit care that is necessary to save someone's major bodily functions and major bodily organs. And it's again, if you want to talk about violence, like that to me is like an example of it.
She's right.
100%. Yeah. I mean, the way that he keeps talking about
no Adam's apple, but I can make some points.
No, 100%, and really good ones, by the way. The way that he talks so much about like Epicureans, that he talks about it more and more, and how it's interesting because my friend Alok, who I'm just obsessed with, they have this theory where like part of why the conservatives get so angry when they see like non-binary queer people expressing themselves in public is because like when you let yourself express yourself and you don't repress, there's this like anger and jealousy at the sight of this. And he's literally talking about that you need to like deny yourself what makes you happy, deny yourself who you are to conform to this idea. And the reason that our society is failing is because people aren't doing that. They're just expressing themselves too much. And that's a lot of where I think his anger comes from in this niche of like evangelical, where they're like, we're suppressing ourselves. We're doing what we were told to do by, God and by this book or our interpretation of it. So other people should too. I think that's really interesting because he really is saying that with like not even saying it without saying it. He's like literally saying that.
So one thing I wanted to get your take on, JVN, is recently Josh Hawley allowed his wife to argue before the Supreme Court. And I'm only being I don't know what the dynamics are. Like, I mean, we got very little mention of her and very little mention of his daughter in the book. It's almost as though women don't exist, but we know she exists because she appeared before the lectern at the Supreme Court on behalf of the Alliance Defending Freedom to argue against the availability of mifepristone, one of the drugs in the 2-drug medication abortion protocol. Is it inconsistent with manhood to have your wife out in the world working and talking to 5 male members of the Supreme Court? Is that manhood? Is he enlightened? Like, what is this? I don't understand. Is this feminism? I don't know. What do you think, JVN?
I mean, it's just giving. If it weren't so scary, you would laugh. It's just so, yeah. He clearly hasn't fully rejected nihilism, darling.
There are a lot of the...
or something. That's like, chapter 8, rejecting nihilism.
But it is interesting because like I see this in J.D. Vance too. This is sort of a thing with people like J.D. Vance too. Like J.D. Vance is always sort of espousing these kind of like manhood adjacent themes about traditional families and, like how important the traditional family is. And he's definitely against paid family leave and all of that. Yet he has a wife who he met at Yale Law School who's incredibly accomplished, who clerked for the Supreme Court and is a working lawyer. So, I mean, some of this sort of feels a little bit like traditional family, traditional values, breadwinner husband, dependent wife for you, but not for me. I get to have like sort of, a different kind of life.
It's actually really interesting because it's very Gilead, and like that main character, it's like, it's okay because she's working to further the values of like Christian nationalism. So it's like your wife can work as long as she's working to enforce these structures and these ideas. And I think that men in power have often seen the way that like their partners can help to further their influence and spread their influence, which, I mean, you even saw that with like, I mean, like we love oh my God, my gay brain. The suffragettes.
The suffragettes.
Yes, the suffragette study. I kept wanting to be like segregationist, and I was like, that's not it. But in some ways they were, because they did not fucking include black women.
Definitely not.
And but they also did not include women of color.
That's true. You're right.
So, but that's another way that you saw like the way that power works, and the way that like it has to work in its kind of own time. And I think that both, the left and the right has this show itself.
The gendered aspect of white patriarchy.
Yeah. And so this is an example of that.
I don't know that J.D. Vance's wife is involved in conservative causes. She sort of stays out of the frame. But I think it's a good point.
Very Jenny Thomas.
That often the gender politics, the racial politics, it is all wrapped up. And there is a way in which women can facilitate patriarchy, even as it ostensibly works against them.
Because it's the whole idea that Stacey Abrams talks about, like fighting over crumbs, instead of like, why don't you have the whole cake? It's like, it's, and that is like the Jenny Thomas thing too, because we saw so much how she was like deeply ingrained in trying to like be all up in there, and like, her relationship to power. Also too, just like the book review of it all, the titles or the chapter titles are really like intense. Like, and isn't the last one like, who's going to run the country? Like, that's really what he's scared of. Like, other people have too much power and too much voice. Like, that's really what he's scared of. And this is like a call to action, because he's like,
no, that's a great point.
He's such a rude ass. I can't believe I ever said he had a good Adam's apple.
I think that's right.
Yeah, it is this kind of profound threat that sort of the advances made by women and people of color and LGBTQ folks represent to Hawley and his ilk, as Melissa was saying earlier. Like, that's the kind of fundamental anxiety at the heart of the book that motivates it. And I also think that, Hawley, and we were talking about his wife, Erin, I think he is holding himself out as he wants to be the standard bearer of the Republican Party in the next generation, right? Like, we right now have this gerontocracy, and there is going to be a gap at some point in which there will need to be a new leadership class. I'm sure he wants to run for president. And he, either way, like, wants to be an important defining figure in the political life of the country. And his views are terrifying. And so that's why we thought it was worth, like, the maybe masochistic undertaking of reading this book and reading it carefully and trying to sort of pull the threads on the actual claims and worldview at the heart of it, because this is someone who is not only in dialogue with the law as it's developing on the Supreme Court today, but I think is poised to be a major national political figure. And this is the world that he envisions and would like to bring about. And it's really important to be clear-eyed in our view of that.
One more little tiny thing. I hope I didn't talk too much and ruin this episode. I'm so glad that you guys had me back, and I love you guys so much. But I lived in Kansas City when Josh Hawley got elected in 2018, because I was shooting Queer Eye at the time. And my dad and stepmom currently live in Missouri. And I talk and fight with my dad a lot about politics. But the point of what I was going to say is that the brand of the culture that Josh Hawley is selling is deeply palatable for a huge swath of our country. And, I've been really curious on my pod about spirituality and the way that like spirituality and, more importantly, religion interfaces with our politics and motivates people to do things. And this is a really important time. So what you guys have done here is really important. And it's really important that we understand, no matter how masochistic and scary it is, what is going on the other side, because they are not only deeply in conversation with like the future of the country, but they are really influencing what's happening, and people are really buying what they're selling. So thanks for continuing to do all your guys' great work.
Well, likewise, thanks so much for joining us today. I don't know if I'm ever going to look at Mitt Romney the same way again. I don't think I can. But JVN, thank you for reading this book. We know it was a big lift. It was a big ask. We read it too. We read it too, and that's all I'm going to say. And we really appreciate all of your insights. Again, The book is out. You don't have to buy it. We read it for you. Just listen to this or read our forthcoming review of the book in the Michigan Law Review when it drops. The review is called Of Might and Men by me, Kate Shaw, and Leah Litman, with our research assistant, Jonathan Van Ness. We should give you a little credit.
You guys did so good.
We're going to drop you in the dagger note.
Yeah.
Well, until next time, Jonathan, I'm sure we are going to come calling on you again to join us once more, since these clowns give us a never-ending stream of material
Yes.
to be working with.
And it's always so great to have you. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much
having
for
me,
joining
guys.
us, Jonathan.
I just realized after you said that, Melissa, this is his idea of profiles in courage. Like, this is his, like, love letter to America. Oh my God.
Oh, Profiles in Courage, the JFK book that he wrote before becoming president, that his dad got published. Yeah. Wow, that is a deep cut, JVN.
I had to save it for the end, you know? I pulled a Vanessa Williams.
So good.
Save the
Wait, you
best
know what
for
also
last.
we just need to talk about really quick? PSS, just really quick, and then I'm going to, like, literally be late for filming. Before we started this, and I don't know if I hit the recording, because I was, like, I'm in Vegas shooting Queer Eye now, and I'm in a little closet in our Airbnb that's covered in blankets. So that's what's giving this, view. And I was like, oh my gosh, I look really shiny. I need to like just powder the face really quick. And then Kate was saying, can we say it, Kate? Can we tell the full, our full healing story
Sure.
for the people?
Of course.
Because it's also the antidote to this fucking book. Your huz was filming where you were
It
filming
is,
yesterday,
yeah,
and he
the
left
palette
his
cleanser.
powder. And so you're like, oh my God, I
Yeah.
need my powder. And I just think that is so great because I've literally done twice on, like, spoiler alert. These men love a little concealer and a little powder. They want to feel good too. So I'm teaching a lot of guys like how to do that this season. Because I'm like, they don't even know how to color match. They don't know like the right order to do anything. So I'm just like teaching them really quick so they can have like, more confident under circles.
You need to actually teach them how to do it, and we all need to spread the word that it is completely fine to powder your nose and conceal those dark circles under your eyes.
In fact, we'd like it.
And we should all embrace that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
Yes.
you guys should feel the pressure to do it
This
too.
is a good positive note
And
to
also, you
end
just
on.
feel so much cuter.
Normalize an even skin tone.
Yes.
Normalize an even skin tone.
Yes. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us.